My mother looked at my shoes before she looked at my face. That was the first thing I noticed when I walked into my brother's celebration dinner. Not the white tablecloths, not the champagne glasses, not the expensive restaurant my parents had rented for the night. My shoes. They were clean, but old. Black flats with a small scratch near the toe. The kind of shoes you wear when you still think twice before buying new ones. My mother's eyes dropped to them for half a second. Then she smiled. Not warmly, politely. The way people smile at someone they're embarrassed to know. "You made it," she said, as if I had arrived from somewhere unfortunate. My father glanced over her shoulder and gave me a quick nod. "Emily?" Not sweetheart, not good to see you. Just my name. Across the room, my brother Daniel stood near the bar wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my rent. People surrounded him like he was some kind of prince. My parents' friends, old neighbours, business partners, relatives who had never answered my texts, but suddenly had plenty of time for Daniel. A gold banner hung behind him. "Congratulations, Daniel, Regional Director." My mother touched my arm lightly. "Try not to talk about your job tonight," she whispered. I looked at her. "What?" She lowered her voice. "This is Daniel's night. We don't need people asking awkward questions." Awkward questions. That was what my life had become to them. Not difficult, not complicated. Awkward. I looked around the restaurant. Crystal lights, silver forks, smiling relatives. My parents glowing with pride because their son had finally become important enough to show off. And me? I was the daughter they invited because not inviting me would have looked worse. "What do you want me to say if someone asks what I do?" I asked. My mother sighed softly like I was being dramatic. "Just say you're between things." Between things. I almost laughed, because what she didn't know was that 3 blocks away, in the centre of downtown, a 32-story glass building had just finished construction. And tomorrow morning, a sign was being installed above the front entrance. Not a company sign, not a sponsor logo. A name. My name. But that night, I said nothing. I walked into that room like the failure they believed I was. And I let them enjoy their last evening not knowing the truth. Because by sunrise, everything they thought about me was going to collapse. Daniel saw me from across the restaurant and lifted his glass. "There she is," he called out. "The mystery woman." A few people turned. I forced a smile and walked over. Daniel hugged me with one arm, careful not to spill his drink. He smelled like expensive cologne and victory. "Didn't think you'd come," he said. "You invited me." "Mum invited you." He laughed like it was harmless. That was Daniel's gift. He could cut you with a sentence and make the room think it was a joke. My cousin Rachel leaned in. "Emily, are you still doing freelance stuff?" Before I could answer, Daniel spoke. "She's figuring things out." There it was, the family script. Emily is figuring things out. Emily is still searching. Emily is not like Daniel. My father appeared behind him, proud and relaxed, one hand on Daniel's shoulder. "This one worked hard," Dad said, squeezing Daniel's suit jacket. "Always knew he had it in him." I looked at Daniel. He smiled. He knew exactly what that sentence meant. because for years my father had said the opposite about me. She's smart but unfocused. She has potential but no discipline. She starts things and doesn't finish them. She needs to be realistic. The funny thing was, I had been realistic. That was why I stopped telling them anything. When I was 26, I made the mistake of telling my parents I was building a logistics software company. Not glamorous, not exciting. Something that helped mid-sized manufacturers track shipments, invoices, delays, vendor mistakes, and warehouse bottlenecks. My father stared at me across the kitchen table and said, "So, an app?" My mother asked, "But is that a real business?" Daniel laughed and said, "You're going to compete with billion-dollar companies from your apartment." They thought I was dreaming too big, so I made myself smaller, at least in front of them. I stopped mentioning the late nights, the first client, the second client, the investor who found me through a cold email, the warehouse owner in Ohio who cried on the phone because our system saved his company from losing a major contract, the first 7-figure year, the acquisition offer I turned down, the headquarters being built downtown, the building, my building. Instead, when my mother asked how work was, I said, "Fine." When my father asked if I needed money, I said, "No." When Daniel asked if my little computer thing was still going, I said, "Something like that." And they believed me, because believing I was struggling made them comfortable. Daniel leaned closer that night and lowered his voice. "By the way, Mum said you're having money problems again." I stared at him. "I'm not." He raised his eyebrows. "No shame. We've all been there." "You've never been there." He laughed. "True." Then he took a sip of champagne. "I told Dad maybe I could get you an admin role at my company. Nothing big, entry level, but stable." My throat tightened. Not because I needed the job, because he enjoyed offering it. He wanted me grateful, small, below him. "That's generous," I said. "I know." I looked toward the window. Outside, downtown lights flickered behind the glass. Somewhere beyond those buildings, mine waited in the dark, empty and finished, like a secret holding its breath. Daniel followed my gaze. "What are you looking at?" "Nothing." "Still doing that thing where you disappear into your head?" I turned back to him. "No, I was just thinking." "Careful," he said. "That's how you got into trouble last time." Last time. He meant the family meeting 2 years earlier. The one where everything changed. 2 years before that dinner, my parents called me to their house on a Sunday afternoon. They said it was important. When I arrived, Daniel was already there, sitting at the kitchen island, drinking coffee from Dad's favorite mug like he owned the place. My mother had been crying. My father wouldn't look at me. I thought someone was sick. Then Dad slid a folder across the table. "We need you to sign this." I opened it. It was a loan agreement. For Daniel. Not a small one. $280,000. I stared at the number. "What is this?" Daniel cleared his throat. "I had a business opportunity. It didn't go the way I expected." "That's a funny way to say you lost money." His eyes sharpened. Mum stepped in quickly. "Emily, this isn't the time." I kept reading. The loan had been secured against my parents' house, the house they had spent 30 years paying off. The house my mother said would one day be split between both of us. "What does this have to do with me?" I asked. Dad rubbed his forehead. "The bank needs additional assurance." My stomach turned. "You want me to co-sign?" No one answered. That was the answer. I looked at Daniel. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Absolutely not," I said. My mother flinched like I had slapped her. "Emily? No, I'm not signing a loan for Daniel because he made a reckless decision." Daniel laughed under his breath. "Here we go." I turned to him. "What did you do?" He leaned back. "It was an investment." "In what?" He didn't answer fast enough. I looked at my father. "In what?" Dad's jaw tightened. "A restaurant group." I almost couldn't process it. Daniel had no restaurant experience, no management discipline, no patience. He once quit a job because his boss asked him to update a spreadsheet twice. "How much did you put in?" I asked. Daniel said nothing. Mum whispered, "Almost all of it." "All of what?" Her lips trembled. "Our savings." The room went quiet. I felt the old anger rise in me. Not loud, cold. "You gave Daniel your savings?" Dad slammed his hand on the table. "He is our son." "And I'm what?" No one spoke. That silence did something to me. It didn't break me. It clarified me. I looked at the folder and pushed it back. "I'm not signing." My mother began crying harder. Daniel stood. "You always do this." I looked up at him. "What?" "You act like you're better than us." I laughed once. "I'm refusing to risk my future because you destroyed theirs." His face changed. "You don't have a future." The words landed in the kitchen like a glass breaking. My father didn't correct him. My mother didn't either. Daniel kept going. "You live in a tiny apartment. You drive a 10-year-old car. You talk about big plans, but nobody has seen anything. At least I try." I stood there, holding my purse, listening to my family decide who I was. Then my mother said the sentence I never forgot. "Maybe if you had Daniel's ambition, you'd understand." That was the day I stopped explaining myself. Not out of pride, out of protection. I left the house without signing. 3 weeks later, my father called me cruel. 2 months later, my mother stopped inviting me to Sunday dinners. 6 months later, Daniel got promoted at someone else's company, and the family treated it like a resurrection. And I kept building. Quietly. At the restaurant, my father tapped his glass with a knife. The room settled. Daniel moved to the center, smiling like he had practiced humility in the mirror. Dad began his speech. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. As many of you know, Daniel has had his share of challenges." A soft laugh moved through the room. "But he never gave up. He pushed forward. He proved what we always knew, that he was meant for something bigger." My mother wiped her eyes. I stood near the back, holding a glass of water. Dad continued. "As parents, all you want is to see your children succeed. children, plural. But his eyes stayed on Daniel. And tonight, we are proud beyond words. Everyone clapped. Daniel hugged my mother, then my father. People cheered. Someone shouted, "Speech!" Daniel raised both hands. "I'll keep this short," he said, which meant he would not. He thanked his boss, his team, his parents, his mentors. Then his eyes found me. "And I want to say something about family." My stomach tightened. I know not everyone believed in me during hard times. The room shifted. My aunt glanced back at me. Daniel smiled softly. But sometimes the people who doubt you most teach you the most. My fingers tightened around the glass. He was doing it. In public, on his night. He was turning me into the villain in his comeback story. He continued, voice smooth. They teach you resilience. They teach you to work harder. They teach you not to become bitter when people closest to you refuse to support you. My mother looked down. My father stared straight ahead. I could feel people looking at me now. Not directly. Worse, politely, as if they had just learned something disappointing but were too well-mannered to show it. Daniel lifted his glass. "So thank you to everyone who stood by me, and even to the ones who didn't." Applause. Soft at first, then stronger. My face burned, but I didn't move. Because something happened in that moment that helped me more than anger ever had. I saw him clearly. Not as my brother, not as the favorite child, not as the man my parents protected no matter what. I saw him as someone terrified. Terrified that without the family applauding him, there might be nothing underneath. A waiter passed with champagne. Daniel stepped down from the spotlight and walked over to me. "You okay?" he asked. I looked at him. That was unnecessary. He tilted his head. "Was it untrue? You wanted me to co-sign a loan after you gambled away Mum and Dad's savings." His smile disappeared. "Lower your voice." "Why?" His eyes flicked around. "Because you don't know what you're talking about." That was when Rachel appeared beside us. "What loan?" Daniel froze. I turned slowly. Rachel looked between us. "What loan, Emily?" Before I could answer, my mother rushed over. "Everything okay?" Rachel said, "I'm asking about the loan." Mum's expression changed for just 1 second. Fear. Then control. "That's old family business." Daniel laughed too loudly. "Emily loves drama." I stared at him. And for the first time in years, I wanted to say everything. The failed investment, the savings, the pressure to co-sign, the fact that my parents had nearly lost their home because they kept saving Daniel from consequences. But I didn't. Not because I was weak, because tomorrow would do what words never could. So I set my glass down. "You're right," I said. Daniel blinked. "I am?" I smiled. "This is your night." Then I walked away. Behind me, I heard Rachel whisper, "What was that about?" Good, I thought. 1 crack. That was all it took. The next morning, I woke before my alarm. Not because I was excited, because I was terrified. People think success erases fear. It doesn't. It gives fear better clothes. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, wearing a black dress and the pearl earrings I bought myself after my first $1 million contract. My phone buzzed on the counter. Maya. Big day. Don't disappear emotionally. You do that. I smiled. Maya knew me too well. She had been my first real friend after I stopped trying to earn my family's approval. We met at a manufacturing conference where I was so nervous I spilled coffee on a sample brochure. She had laughed, handed me napkins and said, "Good, now you're memorable."
6 months later, she became my COO. 3 years later, she was the only person who had seen me cry in the unfinished lobby of the new headquarters because I couldn't believe the building was real. I typed back, "I'm fine." Her reply came immediately. "Maya, that means you are absolutely not fine." I put the phone down. On my kitchen table sat a sealed envelope. Inside was a handwritten note I had written the night after that family meeting 2 years ago. I hadn't opened it since. I picked it up. My name was written across the front in my own handwriting. Emily, open when they finally see. For a second, I only held it. Then I slid my finger under the flap. The paper inside was creased from being folded too long. I read the first line. Do not become cruel just because they were. I sat down. The apartment was quiet. Outside, morning traffic moved below my window. I kept reading. You are not building this to make them small. You are building this because you refuse to stay small. When the day comes, tell the truth. Not to hurt them, to stop carrying their version of you. My eyes stung, because that was the danger. Not failure, not even humiliation. The danger was that after years of being dismissed, I would want the reveal to wound them. I folded the note and put it in my bag. Then I left for the building. Downtown looked different that morning. Maybe because I knew something most people didn't. Construction crews were finishing the entrance. A film crew had set up near the sidewalk. Employees began arriving in small groups, some taking pictures, some hugging, some standing quietly with coffee cups, like they didn't know what to do with that much emotion. Above the glass doors, a large black cover hid the sign. At 10 a.m., the mayor would arrive. At 10:15, I would give a speech. At 10:30, the cover would drop, and the city would see the name. Hartwell Innovation Center. Hartwell. My last name. The family name my parents thought Daniel would make important. I had used it deliberately. Not for them. For myself. Because I had spent too long feeling like I had to separate who I became from where I came from. Maya met me at the entrance with a clipboard and the expression of someone holding 12 problems in her head. You look calm, she said. I'm not. Good. Calm people are suspicious. She handed me a schedule. Press at 10, ribbon cutting at 10:30, investors at 11, private donor tour at 12, staff event at 2. Also, your phone has been buzzing non-stop. From who? She hesitated. That was enough. I pulled it from my bag. 6 missed calls from Mum, 3 from Dad, 2 from Daniel, a text from Rachel. Rachel. Emily, is this you? Below it was a photo. The building, the covered sign. But someone had caught the side plaque near the entrance. Hartwell Technologies founder and CEO, Emily Hartwell. My breath caught. Maya looked at my face. They know. Rachel does. Maya smiled slightly. Well, that saves us some time. My phone buzzed again. Mum. I watched her name fill the screen. For years I had wanted that call. Not this exact one, but something like it. A call where she finally sounded curious. Where she asked about my life without pity. Where she wanted to know who I really was. Now that it was happening, I didn't answer. Maya didn't push. She just stood beside me. After the call ended, a voicemail appeared. Then another text. Mum, please call me. Your father and I are confused. Confused. Not proud, not sorry. Confused. I locked the phone. Let's go, I said. The first part of the ceremony passed in a blur. The mayor spoke about jobs. An investor spoke about innovation. Maya spoke about grit and systems and the kind of leadership that doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Then it was my turn. I stepped toward the microphone. For a moment, I saw nothing but faces. Employees, reporters, city officials, warehouse owners who had believed in us when we were 3 people working from a rented office with unreliable heat. And near the back of the crowd, my parents. My mother wore the same cream coat from Daniel's dinner. My father stood rigid beside her. Daniel was there too. No suit this time. Just a grey jacket and an expression I had never seen on him before. Not anger, not yet. Calculation. I gripped the edges of the podium. My prepared speech sat in front of me. I didn't look at it. When I started this company, I said, I didn't have a headquarters. I didn't have a team. I didn't have family money. I didn't have a famous mentor. I had a laptop, a problem I couldn't stop thinking about, and a very small apartment where the heat worked only when it felt generous. A few people laughed. My mother looked down. I built Hartwell Technologies because I kept meeting people whose businesses were being quietly destroyed by bad systems. Not dramatic failures. Not headline scandals. Just delays, missing information, lost shipments, unpaid invoices, and small mistakes that became impossible to survive. I paused. And I understood that feeling. The crowd quieted. I understood what it meant to be underestimated because the evidence of your work wasn't visible yet. My father's face tightened. I understood what it meant to keep building when people thought silence meant failure. Daniel looked away. I could have stopped there. I could have made it clean, professional, safe. But then I thought of the note in my bag. Tell the truth. Not to hurt them, to stop carrying their version of you. So I continued. There were years when the people closest to me believed I had nothing. No direction, no future, no real plan. And I let them believe that, because at some point I realized I could either spend my energy defending the work or doing the work. The air changed. I could feel it. People knew this was no longer just a business speech. But this building is not revenge, I said. It's proof. Proof that quiet years matter. Proof that being unseen is not the same as being unsuccessful. Proof that you can be misunderstood and still be building something real. Maya smiled from the side. My voice steadied. So today, we open this centre not as a monument to one person, but as a home for every person who has ever had to work twice as hard before anyone believed them once. Applause rose, at first gentle, then louder. I stepped back as the cover above the entrance began to lower. Black fabric slid down the glass. And there it was. Hartwell Innovation Centre. Sunlight hit the letters. For a second, the whole street seemed to hold still. Then the applause broke open. People cheered, employees hugged, cameras flashed. And through all of it, I saw my parents staring at the sign like it had accused them of something. Daniel wasn't looking at the sign. He was looking at me. And now his expression had changed, because he understood something my parents didn't yet. This wasn't just a building. It was leverage. After the ceremony, people surrounded me. Reporters asked questions. Employees introduced their families. Investors shook my hand. I smiled until my cheeks hurt. But I knew the real conversation was coming. It happened near the side entrance, away from the cameras. Emily. My father's voice. I turned. My parents stood a few feet away. Daniel hovered behind them. For the first time in my adult life, none of them looked certain how to speak to me. My mother stepped forward. Why didn't you tell us? That was her first question. Not, are you happy? Not, how did you do this? Not, I'm sorry. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at her cream coat, her perfect hair, her trembling mouth. I tried. She blinked. When? I almost laughed. In the beginning. My father frowned. You never said it was this. You never asked long enough to hear the answer. Daniel scoffed. Come on. I looked at him. He stopped. A small, satisfying silence opened between us. Mum's eyes filled with tears. We're your parents. I know. How could you let us find out like strangers? Something inside me shifted. Because that was exactly how they had treated me. Like a stranger whose life embarrassed them. I kept my voice calm. You didn't find out like strangers. You found out like people who stopped paying attention. My mother's face crumpled. Dad stepped forward. That's not fair. No, I said. It isn't. He stared at me, confused by my answer. I continued. It wasn't fair when you asked me to co-sign Daniel's loan. It wasn't fair when you called me cruel for saying no. It wasn't fair when you let him tell people I didn't support the family. It wasn't fair when Mum told me not to talk about my job last night because it might be awkward. My mother looked at Daniel. Daniel's jaw tightened. Dad said, This is not the place. It never is. That stopped him, because it was true. There had never been a place. Not the kitchen, not Sunday dinner, not holidays, not Daniel's celebration. Every time the truth came close, someone decided it was inconvenient. Daniel stepped forward. Okay, you made your point. I turned to him. I haven't started. His eyes narrowed. There he was, the real Daniel. Not the charming brother, not the golden child. The man underneath the applause. "What do you want?" he asked. I stared at him. The question was so revealing that for a second I couldn't answer. Because in Daniel's world, every truth had to be a transaction. Every conversation had a winner. Every relationship was a ladder. "I don't want anything from you," I said. He smiled coldly. "Then why use the family name?" My mother whispered, "Daniel." But he kept going. "You could have called it anything, but you used Hartwell. Why? To embarrass us?" I looked at the sign above the door. "No, because it's mine too." His face hardened. "Convenient." Maya appeared near the entrance, watching carefully but not interrupting. Daniel lowered his voice. "You think this makes you better than us?" "No." "Then what?" I stepped closer. "It means I was never what you needed me to be." He frowned. "The failure." The word hung between us. My father looked away. My mother closed her eyes. Daniel's mouth opened, but nothing came out. For once, he had no joke ready. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced down. An email. Subject line, urgent. Daniel Hartwell /HGI vendor contract. My stomach tightened. HGI. Hartwell Global Imports. Daniel's employer. The company that had just promoted him. I opened the email. It was from our legal department. "Emily, flagging this immediately. HGI's regional office submitted a vendor integration request last week. The authorization packet includes Daniel Hartwell as internal sponsor. There may be a conflict of interest due to family connection. Also, one attachment appears to reference your former prototype documentation from 2019. Please review before approval." I stopped breathing. Former prototype documentation. Before Hartwell Technologies existed. Before investors. Before the building. Back when I had trusted exactly one person in my family enough to show him what I was working on. Daniel. I slowly raised my eyes. He was still watching me. But now I noticed something. He wasn't angry because I had succeeded. He was afraid because he had known longer than he pretended. And somewhere inside his company's new contract request was a piece of my past that should never have been there. My mother touched my arm. "Emily, what is it?" I looked at Daniel. His face had gone pale. And in that moment, I understood. The building was only the first reveal. The real betrayal was still buried. And this time, I wasn't going to stay quiet. For a moment, nobody spoke. My mother's hand was still on my arm. My father looked between me and Daniel. And Daniel looked exactly like a man who had just realized a door he thought was locked forever had suddenly swung open. "Emily?" my mother asked quietly. I didn't answer. I was staring at my brother. Back in 2019, before there were investors, before there was an office, before there was a company, there had only been me, a laptop, a folding table, and hundreds of nights spent building the first version of my software. I had shown it to exactly one person. Daniel. At the time, I still believed he was my brother. I still believed family meant something. I remembered inviting him to my apartment. I remembered showing him the prototype. I remembered him pretending to be interested, asking questions, taking notes, telling me it looked impressive, then disappearing from the project completely. At least that was what I thought. Now I wasn't so sure. "What's wrong?" Dad asked. I looked at Daniel.
When did HGI start using shipment prediction modules?
His face immediately changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough for me. Dad frowned. "What does that mean?" Daniel crossed his arms. "It means she's doing what she always does." "What?" "Making everything about herself." Normally, that line worked. Normally, Mum would rush to defend him. Normally, Dad would change the subject. But something had changed. For the first time in years, the evidence wasn't invisible anymore. The building was standing right behind me. The employees were walking through the doors. The reporters were still nearby. Reality was harder to ignore than family mythology. I looked back at my phone, then at Daniel. "Did you give my prototype to HGI?" Silence. Mum blinked. "What prototype?" Daniel laughed, a little too quickly. "You sound insane." I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't argue, because I had spent years learning something important. The truth doesn't get stronger when you yell it. It gets stronger when you prove it. Maya walked toward us. I handed her the phone. She read the email, then looked at me, then at Daniel. Her expression darkened. That told me everything. "How bad?" I asked. She spoke carefully. "Potentially very bad." Dad looked confused. "Can somebody explain what is happening?" Maya hesitated. I nodded. "Tell them." She took a breath. "Our legal department found internal documentation submitted by Mr. Hartwell's company." She glanced toward Daniel. "Documentation containing portions of Emily's original architecture design." Nobody moved. Mum looked lost. Dad looked angry. Daniel looked trapped. "That's impossible," Daniel said. Maya didn't react. "The files are time-stamped." His jaw tightened. "That doesn't prove anything." "No," Maya said calmly. "The metadata does." The color drained from his face, and for the first time that day, I felt afraid. Not for myself, for what was about to happen. Because I suddenly understood something. This wasn't about a rude brother, or family favoritism, or old wounds. This was potentially corporate theft. Real theft. The kind that destroys careers. The kind lawyers get involved in. The kind journalists love. And the kind investors hate. Dad looked at Daniel. "Tell me she's wrong." Daniel said nothing. My father stared. "Daniel?" Still nothing. My mother looked terrified. "Daniel?" Then finally he spoke, and somehow his answer was worse than denial. "It wasn't like that." My stomach dropped. Because innocent people say, "I didn't do it." Guilty people say, "It wasn't like that." The silence became unbearable. Finally, Dad asked, "What did you do?" Daniel rubbed his face. For the first time in his life, there was nobody left to rescue him. Not Mum, not Dad, not me. No one. And so the truth began to come out. Slowly. Ugly. Piece by piece. Back in 2019, he had taken screenshots, copied documentation, downloaded files from a presentation I had shown him. Not enough to build a company, not enough to recreate my platform, but enough to impress people. Enough to help him climb. Enough to make himself look smarter than he was. Enough to get opportunities, promotions, credibility. And over the years, he kept doing it. Small pieces, small ideas, small shortcuts. Always believing nobody would notice. Always believing I was too insignificant to matter. My mother began crying. Dad looked like someone had punched him. And strangely, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Because suddenly everything made sense. The mockery, the defensiveness, the way Daniel always needed me to stay small. Because if I became visible, his lies became visible too. You stole from me. My voice sounded distant, even to myself. Daniel looked away. I borrowed ideas. I almost laughed. Borrowed? 5 years of work. Borrowed. A career. Borrowed. A future. Borrowed. My father took a step back, as if he no longer recognized his own son. Then something happened that shocked me. Dad turned toward me, not Daniel, me. And his voice cracked. I didn't know. I looked at him. For a second, I wanted to say, "You should have. You never listened. You chose him every time. You ignored every warning." But I didn't, because something else was happening. For the first time in my life, he wasn't defending Daniel. He wasn't explaining him. He wasn't protecting him. He was facing reality. And that mattered. Not enough to erase the past, but enough to matter. My mother wiped her eyes. "Emily." I looked at her. She couldn't finish the sentence, because there was no sentence big enough, no apology large enough, no explanation strong enough. Years had passed. Years. You can't solve years with a few words. Then my phone buzzed again. Another message. Legal. I opened it. My eyes widened. Maya immediately noticed. "What?" I turned the screen toward her. She read it, then exhaled slowly. "What now?" Dad asked. Maya looked up. HGI has suspended Daniel pending investigation. Nobody spoke. The board just received the report. Daniel looked sick. His phone buzzed at exactly the same moment. He checked it, and whatever he saw confirmed everything. The promotion, gone. The celebration, gone. The future he had built on shortcuts, gone. Just like that. Not because of revenge, because actions have consequences. Real ones. For the first time in years, nobody could save him. not even himself. And that's when I realized something. This wasn't my revenge story. It never had been. It was a story about truth. Truth takes longer. Truth is less dramatic. But truth lasts. 3 months later, the investigation ended. Daniel resigned. Several projects were audited. Nothing criminal, but enough misconduct to destroy trust. His reputation never recovered. Mum and Dad sold the large house, not because they had to, because they wanted a smaller life, a quieter one. For a while, we barely spoke. Then, one Sunday, my mother called. Not to ask for money, not to talk about Daniel, not to ask for favours, just to ask if I wanted lunch. That was new. So I went. The conversation was awkward, then less awkward, then normal. Not perfect, never perfect, but real. Dad apologised one afternoon while helping me plant flowers outside my new house. No speeches, no excuses, just, I should have listened. Sometimes simple words carry the most weight. A year later, I stood in front of the Hartwell Innovation Centre again. The glass reflected the afternoon sun. Employees moved through the lobby. The company had doubled in size. New offices were opening, new partnerships were forming. Life was moving forward. I reached into my bag and found the old note, the one I had written years ago. The paper was worn now, the ink fading. I read the final line again. Do not become cruel just because they were. I smiled, then folded it carefully, because that line had saved me. Success hadn't changed my life, not really. The building hadn't changed my life. The money hadn't changed my life. The moment everything changed was the moment I stopped trying to prove my worth to people determined not to see it. That was freedom. And freedom was worth more than any building, even one with my name on it.